Hey guys, I've got a lot of wood in my garage shop and I wanted to get rid of some of them by doing some projects. My mom's been wanting placemats to serve food on, so I decided to make some wood placemats using these white oak offcuts. The first step I did was take my pieces to the miter saw to cut them to the appropriate length. I didn't aim for any specific length, rather I just lay all my pieces down on the floor and measured them based on the shortest piece. Next, I take all my pieces to the planer. Most of the offcuts are from the same board, but some were slightly thicker or thinner than others. Either way, all the pieces were around 0.8 inches thick, and I wanted these placemats to be closer to half an inch. I know, it's a lot of planing and frankly it wastes some materials, but I don't have a bandsaw to resaw the pieces, so this will have to do. After the planer, I used the table saw to joint both edges and cut some larger stock down to size. The blue bar you see is actually a 6-foot level I got at Home Depot. I learned this trick for jointing boards by watching Chris at Four Eyes Furniture. I'll link his video down below. He even includes a nice animation on why the setup works. These are all the pieces on their respective boards after the cuts. There are definitely some gaps, not all of them are seamless joints, but I didn't want to lose any more material trying to get them perfect. That edge you see right there, that will go away anyway when I cut a 45-degree chamfer at the end. Next up is biscuit joining. I decided to experiment on this next step. They say for an edge-to-edge glue up, you don't need joinery because the glue will be plenty strong. Here, I use a biscuit joiner but only in the center. And my reasoning here is that I can easily clamp some cauls when they're at the ends, but not as easily when they're in the center. Granted, maybe I don't need a clamp that can reach the center, and having them just at the ends is perfectly fine. These are the boards post glue up. They actually came out a lot better than I thought. There are some bigger gaps and of course the knots, but those can be filled up with some wood filler and epoxy respectively. This is a neat little trick I learned for covering up small gaps in the wood. I take some wood glue and smear it to just fill in the gap. Then I take some wood dust from the sander bag and fill it in. The dust from the sander is perfect because it's really fine, which helps fill in those small gaps more easily. For these knots, I decided to fill them in with some black epoxy. To be honest, it's more of a dark gray. I like using this 5-minute epoxy by Gorilla. It's perfect for when I have to do small epoxy patchwork. When filling in gaps, it's better to put more than you need so it overflows. That way you can sand it down to make it flush with the rest of the wood. The next day after the epoxy dried, I discovered that most of the pores left a dip. So I'm guessing the knots were probably a lot bigger on the inside. There are a couple options I could do. I could just plane it down so it is flush, but I don't trust my planer to deliver a smooth cut without chipping. On the other hand, I could just pour more epoxy over it and hope I get the same shade of gray. But first, I'm going to sand it down to get it flush so I have a better idea on what to do. I did end up pouring more epoxy over it because I realized it would completely cover the previous pour, so you wouldn't even see if there was any mismatch in color. And it turned out perfect, aside from a few air pockets, but I'm over it at this point. Now we can move on to the last few steps. At the bottom, I do a 45-degree chamfer. I think it looks nice and it does help in picking them up. After that, I add a nice round over on the top just to break the sharp edges. I elevated my pieces so I could use the router, but those blocks did not provide any grip as expected. My piece was moving around so much that it probably messed up some router cuts. If I want to enhance the color of the wood, I like to use a tung oil finish. It's super easy to apply and provides plenty of protection. I keep reading the best way to apply an oil finish is to use a cloth or a rag, but I'm convinced the rag just ends up absorbing most of the oil. I much prefer using like a plastic spreader and then coming in with a rag to clean up the excess. At the same time, maybe my technique just needs some work. But without further ado, let me show you the finished product.